This is a continuing series on improving the quality of writing. In this video, we're looking at vocabulary. Language is everything when it comes to communication, and writing is no exception to that. One of the common difficulties in learning to write better is separating the way that we speak from the way that we write, and vocabulary is a huge part of that. The words that we choose enhance the clarity of what we're saying, but they also demonstrate greater specificity and variety in our communication. In each video, we're looking at things that detract from and things that enhance each element of writing. And in this case, there's 4 elements we're going to look at, numbered D5, D6, D7, and D8. Let's look at these in more detail. D5 relates to repeating similar vocabulary. The key question to ask yourself here is, how much variety do you have in your vocabulary? And are you repeating words or phrases unnecessarily? Our first example reads, basketball is an awesome sport. It is fast-paced and provides an awesome workout. The game can be difficult and challenging to new players. There's a couple of things that might stand out to you straight away. For instance, the writer here uses the word awesome twice. So it's a repeat of that similar vocabulary. We want to vary our vocabulary and avoid repetition. In this case, adding a different term could demonstrate a more specific understanding of that aspect of the content. Another error in this writing sample is in the second sentence, where it reads, the game can be difficult and challenging. Difficult and challenging are similar words that largely mean the same thing. So do we need to have both of these? Something to watch out for in the construction of your sentences is the word and. Often, we can find ourselves using the same word or a very similar word, one after the other, when one would suffice. It's all about being more concise. The second example reads, the movie had a good story, good characters, and good action sequences. There's certainly a lot of good stuff going on here, but did we need to say good 3 times? Probably not. The use of that word in the 3 instances was unnecessary repetition, and it added more words to the sentence than we needed. The third example reads, Destiny 2 was made in 2017 and was one of the most popular games made that year. You notice in this case, the word that's repeated is made. Let's look at some of the changes we've made to vocabulary. For the first example, basketball is a fast-paced sport which provides players with a high-energy workout. In this case, I've removed the term awesome and I've said high energy instead. Not only have I removed the repetition of language, but I've also been more specific in the type of workout it is, rather than just saying it's awesome. The second sentence now reads, the game can be challenging to new players. I got rid of the term difficult because it really said the same thing, and by deleting that word, I haven't actually compromised the meaning of the sentence. I've just made it more concise, which is always a good thing. The second example now reads, the film had a number of captivating features, from its story to its characters. Notice how I've changed up some of the language here to say that there were a number of captivating features, and that includes the story and the characters. So rather than saying the film had a captivating story and captivating characters, I've included both of those terms in relation to the same description. Again, it's all about avoiding repetition and being more concise in the way that I'm communicating. For the final example, I've written, Destiny 2 was released in 2017 and is regarded as one of the most popular games of the year. In this case, you'll notice again that I've changed up my vocabulary to avoid repetition. Rather than repeating the word made, I've added greater specificity and variety. You'll notice I made a few changes in the vocabulary as I went along, and I'll do this throughout this video, and this relates specifically to the next detractor common in language. D6 is when we use simplistic, broad, or inaccurate vocabulary. So we need to ask ourselves, is my vocabulary too broad or too vague? Is my vocabulary too simple, or does it sound like I'm speaking? Am I using the most specific and concise vocabulary? The previous section of this video saw me making active changes to my vocabulary as I went, and we're going to look at a similar thing in this case. Often when we use simplistic, broad, or inaccurate vocabulary, it's because we are mimicking the way that we speak, rather than creating our own written voice. Let's look at these examples. The game's got good multiplayer. There's heaps of modes and stuff to do. Words like got and heaps are largely slang and spoken words that we don't see very often in written language. Words like stuff are also very broad terms. When we say there's lots of stuff to do, that could include a high variety of different bits and pieces, so being more specific really helps. The second example reads, "You have to watch out around you that some guy doesn't jump out of the shadows." Again, we see a lot of spoken aspects in here. When we say you have to watch out around you, that's quite a long-winded, simplistic way of describing a process. And I'm sure there's a better word that we could have used in this case to capture all of those four words and be much more concise. We also see words like some guy, which is a really broad term that could apply to a range of different contexts. If we were talking about a character in a film, then rather than saying some guy, we could have said a character. Another aspect we see in here is words like doesn't jump out of the shadows, which again is a very spoken way of explaining a process. So what we need to aim to do is think about how we could capture some of these drawn out simplistic elements of our writing, make them more concise and specific in our vocabulary. The last example reads, "The graphics of the game are really bad and the gameplay could be better." In my previous section, you would have seen that I got rid of words like good and bad because they tend to be very simplistic but also very broad. It's about being specific and to the point. The gameplay could be better also doesn't really give me a lot to go on. It doesn't explain what about the gameplay is missing or why it could be improved. So we need to watch out for these simplistic and broad statements where we say, oh, it could be better, but we don't give any further or specific context. Let's have a look at some of the differences that are made. For the first improvement, it reads, "One of the standout features of the game is its multiplayer." So rather than saying the game's got good multiplayer, we've brought in this element of a standout feature of the game. We read on to say, "There is a wide variety of game modes," which is a better way of saying there are heaps of modes. Even adding the term game in front of the term modes adds more specificity to what we're talking about. We also read offering players numerous options as to how they level up their character, which is a more specific way of describing the stuff that they do. If the game in this context is about gaining experience and leveling up a character, then we need to be specific about that, because the more to the point we are, the better our meaning comes across. And writing is very much about being concise and targeted. The second example now reads, "Players need to be alert to the threat of enemy attack." So this concept of watching out around you has now changed in the language to being alert. And instead of saying some guy doesn't jump out of the shadows, we've used the term enemy. We've also improved the vocabulary in regards to someone jumping out of the shadows. Here we've suggested enemy attack is always lurking in the shadows. So our use of varied and more interesting vocabulary makes our writing seem more professional, polished, and concise. The final improvement reads, "The graphics of the game suffer from drops in frame rate and pop-in, and the unresponsive controls can cause unnecessary deaths during critical moments of gameplay." You notice in this case I've added more words rather than being more concise. However, this is overruled by the fact I've been much more specific in my description. In the previous example, where I wrote the graphics of the game are really bad and the gameplay could be better, I would need more sentences to follow that in order to explain what I mean. I can cut to the chase here by making sure that I'm specific from the beginning, and that's going to save me words and time where I would have been unnecessarily explaining elements that I'd left vague to begin with. D7 is directly connected to the process of nominalisation. Often when we speak, we use very verb-centred connection, but written language is dependent on nouns and the relationship they have to one another. We try and use as many noun groups and processes in our language as possible in order to make our writing clearer. Some questions to ask are, is the relationship between information as clear and concise as it could be? Are you showing the cause and effect between different noun groups? And are you concise and refined in the way that you communicate? All of these things can be enhanced by using nominalisation. In the first example, we read, "The hero sacrifices their life, but it means that the world gets to live on." The process of nominalisation would really help this sentence because it would allow us to recognise that the sacrifice that's made has a direct impact on the outcome for the world. So creating stronger balance between those areas and connecting them with an is substitute will improve the quality of what we're saying. There's also great benefit in nominalising because it allows us to identify words like gets to, and think about better noun-related terms that would be more specific and clear in this case. The second example reads, politicians are always attempting to get your vote, so they lie about things. Again, when we speak in this way, we don't notice quite so much, but as we read it, we recognise that the writing does not sound as professional or pointed as it could be. The third example reads, by selecting more test subjects, they can experiment with more ideas in their products. What we see in this case is an overuse of the term they and their, which over-personalises the language, and by nominalising, we can reduce the unnecessary active voice within this communication. When we look at our improvements, we can see there's a significant difference. The first example reads, the hero's sacrifice preserves the world's future. It's clear, it's concise, and it says the same thing above in less words. The second example is similar. The deceit of politicians is motivated by their need for votes. You'll notice in this case I've changed the order of the actions. Originally it talked about how politicians are trying to get votes and so they lie. But by nominalising, I was able to recognise that the behaviour, which is deceiving people, is motivated by their need for votes. So by putting my processes in this way, I make the cause and effect between information much clearer. The third example reads, greater test subject selection promotes broader experimentation of the product. If you're writing in a scientific context, they'll talk to you about the need to write with passive voice, which means trying to remove the body that's actually performing these actions. You'll see in the above example, we had a lot of they and their, but in the nominalised version, we've taken all of that personal information out, which makes it much more objective, clear and professional. The last detractor in our vocabulary is the overuse of intensifying or unnecessary adverbs. And the questions to ask are, am I concise and to the point in my writing? And am I using unnecessary words in my sentences? Often when we speak, we can sometimes get a little bit awkward. And in order to fill that awkward silence, we throw in extra words like or but or something like that in order to make us feel a bit more comfortable. It's important, however, that we don't write in this way. Our first example here reads, it is really important to address the issue at hand. Going back to our work on noun groups, an intensifier is a word that goes before a process to add intensity or strength to it. So in this case, I could say it is important, but I've said it is really important. What we need to recognise about good formal writing is that intensifiers are generally quite rare. In this case, it would be more effective to be more direct and straight to the point. And I think you'll find that the weight of the message stays just as strong, if not stronger, when we remove the intensifier. The second example has what we call a double intensifier, because it uses the word very and the word deep. Intensifiers aren't necessarily a bad thing, and when they're well crafted and use the right language, they can have strong effect. But always watch out for the risk of using multiple intensifiers. In this case, you could say the matter is of concern, but the very and the deep add unnecessary intensity to the piece and actually dilute what you're trying to say. The third example has some more unnecessary language. Like if people aren't willing to change, then we are going to have to think about making what will probably be a very unpopular decision. We can imagine someone speaking in this manner, but we don't write in this sense. Words such as like, in this case, are unnecessary gap fillers, so we can get rid of that. The other thing that's illustrated here is it takes a long time to get to the point of what the process is, which is really about making a decision. But it goes on to say we're going to have to think about making what will probably be an unpopular decision. There's a lot of words in there that don't need to be there, and they all interrupt the clarity of what we're trying to say. In our improved versions, we read, it is important to address the issue at hand. A clear, direct statement without the use of the intensifier comes across more professional and more effective. The second example reads, this matter is of deep concern. We've kept our intensifier deep in this case, but by getting rid of the very and not double dipping in our intensifiers, we've got a much better tempered and measured statement. The third example has the most significant change. If residents in the area are unwilling to change, the council will have to implement preventative measures. So we notice in this case, we've made the process much clearer and we've revamped some of the vocabulary. Where originally the language was about going to have to think about making a decision, here we've just said that the Council will take preventative measures. Always try and be as direct as you can when it comes to the process that you're talking about. If we have to start thinking about the possibility of considering whether we should plan, all of that sort of stuff just gets lost in the wash. So it's important to be clear and concise with your processes. Hopefully this video can help you improve the vocabulary in your writing, and be sure to check out the other videos to find out more ways that you can improve the quality of your written work.